Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, January 7th, 2025 meeting of the Ashland Zoning Board of Appeals. We are located at the Ashland Town Hall on the second floor in the Select Board hearing room, and this is a hybrid meeting, so we are also available on Zoom. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast live by WACA-TV and live streamed on Facebook. Remote participation is available using the Zoom video conferencing platform, and any disruption with our video conferencing platform will result in the platform being shut down. Meetings will continue to be broadcast on WACA-TV and live streamed on Facebook. On the agenda that was published for this evening's meeting, there is a link to join the Zoom broadcast, and there's also a telephone number to log in and join the meeting as well. First order of business will be to call the meeting to order. I, John Trefethen, am present.
Hi, Brian Forrestone, present.
I, Stuart Siegel, am present.
I, Ryan Sullivan, am present.
Excellent. We have on the agenda this evening a public hearing involving an application for a comprehensive permit at 10-60 Main Street. This is going to be the first of many hearings on this proposal, so we would urge everybody to have patience. Our hope tonight is for the developer to present an overview of the project that they're proposing. The board will have an opportunity to ask some preliminary questions. We will open it up to public comment for a period of time. Our hope and expectation is that the hearing will not last longer than 2 hours tonight. But as I said, this is the first of at least several, and I caution to say many, but previous experiences with comprehensive permit requests, sometimes they turn into many. In any event, let's get started. I will read the notice that was published in the local newspaper. The Ashland Zoning Board of Appeals will hold a public hearing to hear the petition from SLV Ashland LLC requesting a comprehensive permit per MGL Chapter 40B, Sections 20-23, to allow for the development of 2 multi-family story buildings for 250 apartment units and 337 concealed podium parking spaces. The applicant also proposed to restore and convert the northernmost mill's 7,500 square feet into commercial and retail space, some of it open to the public. The property in question is located at 10-60 Main Street, Assessors Map 14, Lot 128, in the Ashland Overlay Downtown District A, parenthesis ADD-A, all capitals, close parenthesis, and industrial base zoning. And that being said, I would ask the applicant to, I guess, step forward and identify yourself if you would please, and give us an outline of what you're proposing.
Can I?
And just so you know, we have a new audio video system set up here in the Select Board meeting room, thanks to the hard work of Paul from WACA-TV. This is one of the first meetings, I believe, where it's been in use. So there may be a few glitches, but everybody should be able to hear what's being said better than under our old system. So in advance, I thank you for your patience if we have some glitches.
We'll just roll with that, even if it's not full screen. But you have to control it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of the public. For the record, my name is Jeffrey Engler from the firm of Strategic Land Ventures, here representing tonight SLV Ashland, in this case, the applicant for this proposal. We appreciate the board entertaining us this evening. The objective tonight is to touch upon all of the key disciplines, if you will, of the proposal. So tonight I'm joined by, and it's a cast of thousands, so forgive me for referring. So Brendan Carey from Bowler will be presenting landscape architecture. Bill Messenger from Embark will be presenting architecture. John Cusich from Bowler will be presenting our civil engineering. Jeff Dirk from Vanass and Associates will be presenting traffic. Chris Lucas from Lucas Environmental, our wetland scientist, will be talking environmental. And then we're also joined by George Campbell, who's also on our environmental team. So with that said, we're very excited about the project. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about we as the applicant, only in that we've spent a fair amount of time with the town in conceiving the plan that's before the board this evening. I couldn't say exactly how many meetings we've had with the town and the planning department and others, culminating in a presentation to the Board of Selectmen, I believe in May. But the plan and the presentation that we're walking through tonight reflects many of the things that we've heard along the way. So I've been involved in maybe over 140 Bs, and I would say that's not always the case. Frequently the developer submits a plan exactly what they want to do. In this case, there's many components in this plan that we've been asked to incorporate by various players in the town that have been involved and see this as an opportunity for some good economic development. So with that said, just a little bit about our company. We're a small development company. I've been involved in multifamily residential housing for over 20 years and permitted probably 5,000 or 6,000 units. But about 6 years ago, we started Strategic Land Ventures with my partner, Justin Krebs, who could not be here tonight. And since then, we've developed a good representation of projects, some of which are before you on this screen. Unfortunately, the pointer doesn't really work. But most recently, we developed two projects that have been both completed in the last 12 months, both in Winchester, coincidentally. One is called the Sanctuary at Winchester North, 147 units. And the other is the Sanctuary at Winchester West, which is 96 apartment units. Those projects are about 2 miles apart from each other, and there are two most recently completed. We also have the Bancroft's Loss, which some of you are probably familiar with, which is not too far from here, 258 apartment units. And we have a project in Situate, 60 apartment units. We only do apartments. We don't do condominiums. We don't do single-family houses. We don't do townhouses. Our business is multifamily residential rental apartments. We also have a few other projects, the Brookliner, which is right on the Brookline-Brighton line, 108 apartments. We did 58 units in Bridgewater, which is effectively on the Bridgewater State campus. And then we partnered with Toll Residential or Toll Apartment Living to do 190 units in Medway. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but if at some point during the public hearing process, the board was ever interested in a, for lack of a better description, a field trip, we could go to Winchester or really any of our projects to show you the kind of quality that we pride ourselves in and have developed. We also have a project that's fully approved in Walpole, which is 142 units, a 6-story building that was done as a friendly 40B in downtown Walpole. And we plan on breaking ground on that project at the end of the year. That's right by the MBTA commuter rail station. We also have a project in Manchester by the Sea, which has recently been approved by the Housing Appeals Committee. Admittedly, that project has been quite contentious with that municipality for reasons I won't get into tonight, but ultimately we think that will be a fabulous project as well. And then we also are doing a phase 2 of the Bancroft's Loss in Framingham. The town, or Framingham, was very receptive to phase 1, and we're currently working with the town on phase 2 of that project, which will be an additional 293 units. So with that said, we pride ourselves on exceptional quality, delivering a first-rate experience to ultimately the people that live there. A little bit about our company: it's really my partner Justin and myself. So we're not Avalon Bay, we're not other national companies that have regional representation. What you see tonight is what you get. So if people are issuing comments or questions or want answers, they can rest assured that the principals and the people doing the development are the people that are going to be rolling our sleeves up and answering the questions, and will be involved through the duration of the project. This is our development, our team, our decisions, largely our money. So we take a lot of pride in the developments that we do. We also take pride in working with municipalities, as we have in this case in Ashland. And I would also just like to reiterate to what the chair said, that this is the first hearing of many. So mostly for members of our audience tonight, we're not representing this evening that we have the answer to every question, but we will endeavor to provide those answers. We have seen on the agenda the peer review consultants. I think that the town is planning to retain. That's a critical part of any 40B project, is getting peer reviewers. For those in the audience unfamiliar, the town will retain professionals across a multitude of disciplines, i.e. civil engineering, traffic, to represent the town's interests in reviewing the plans that we submit, and we will pay for that. So in other words, it's not, here's our application, town, trust us, everything works, where's our permit? It's an iterative process that will be critiqued and reviewed throughout the duration of the public hearing process, until such time that we've satisfied the technical reviewers representing the town that we are complying with all the applicable regulations and guidelines that we're required to meet under 40B. So with that said, I will sit down and turn it over to my technical team, starting with Bill, who will walk everybody through our architectural presentation. I can't guarantee that I won't hop up at some time during the hearing, because I can't help myself, and I just want to make sure that we are communicating important components of the plan, should it be topical at that time. But we're going to walk through all the various disciplines and be happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation. So if anybody has any questions now, I'd be happy to answer it. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Mr. Mangler, thank you very much. Before you do that, I just wanted to do a couple of housekeeping things that I had neglected to do at the start. First, I wanted to make sure that the record is clear that our associate member, Stuart Siegel, who did answer the roll call, is present on Zoom this evening observing the hearing. And I also neglected to introduce two very important people for the town: our town planner, Peter Matchik, and town council, Lisa Mead, who is here tonight as well. And with respect to peer review, and this is probably as good a time as any to just indicate, I've been told that the peer review, the fees are $40,000, and that as soon as the town gets the check, the peer reviews will start and we can move this process forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that said, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you for your time. My name is Bill Mensinger. I'm a principal at Embark. We've worked with Jeff and Justin for several years now on a few of the projects that he had displayed earlier. And I'd like to just take you through the architectural design for this project. Feel free to jump in any time you wish. So the proposed project. It sits on roughly 4 acres of land, and it's an interesting combination of an architectural restoration of the existing northernmost mills and new construction, which is complementary to a mixed-use development. The site has a series of post-Civil War mills that we're looking to restore and activate on the northern part of the site, and since has been added on over the years with a less architectural, well, some brick mill warehouse style buildings with less, say, architectural integrity and or value compared to the mills. The current site, again, sits on, there's two acres of buildable structures on the site, which makes up the mill and the brick buildings, and then an additional 2 acres of impervious asphalt parking that's currently used, or pervious area that's used for parking, loading, and drop-off and opportunities. Something to note about all of this land is that it's not only impervious, it's also all disturbed, and it's also contaminated, and Buller's going to talk a little bit about that. So the work that we're proposing is a greatly improved architecturally and environmentally on the entire project. I was going to say next slide, but I will take that. Can we go? Yeah, let me see if I can arrow over. So this is just a quick snapshot of some context views. I'm going to fly through these because I think most of the audience here is familiar with the site, but here's just the northernmost mill and an area where we're proposing some activated public court space as a gateway to the site. This is looking east. Here's a view looking directly at the 2 bills that we are proposing to restore, looking northeast. Something to point out in these views is just the way that the parking is set up too, because there's nose-in parking. There's a very narrow sidewalk, flush curb condition from between the sidewalk. There's no transition between that and the drive aisle, so angled parking. It creates a little bit of a security concern and a maneuverability concern with coming in and out off of Main Street with the public. We're looking to improve that, which you'll see in some future slides. Here's another shot. This is a real good shot of how close the drive aisle is to the park, to the sidewalk, with no sort of delineation line or barrier. I apologize for the scrolling here. And in this view, these are you can see a little bit of the brick buildings. The brick building is the portion that we're looking, with this one single mill, the portion that we're looking to replace with a series of 4- and 5-story brick multifamily community complex. A little bit about the site overall, and as an analysis, it's a really amazing site. In my opinion, it has a lot of beautiful features and amazing architectural features to really leverage. So we have the Sudbury River flanking the north side, and it's really nicely wooded around all of the north and the east side. The whole east side is with the wetland buffer and the privacy there, that will not be developed on that that back right-hand corner. Off to the north and the west, you have the beautiful mill pond, sunset views, natural water views, and looking across to the wooded site. Down to the south, you have the commuter rail that runs along the full side of the south side of the site, and also if the building's fronted along Main Street, which is a nice opportunity, high visibility. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. This is our first floor plan overlay with the landscape plan. I'm not going to talk much about the landscaping so much, but really the design, really, as we discussed, it maintains the 2 mill buildings on the northern side. Those are the ones portrayed in the peachy color there. So the large commercial / restaurant opportunity with that public plaza at that corner gateway. To the right of that is the the smaller mill building, which we're utilizing as, proposing right now as a small community space around 3,000 square feet, and that'll house our main leasing office for the multifamily complex. This is really conveniently located. It renovates internally the mill building and revitalizes that space, but it also has direct, convenient access with a parking lot that I'm going to talk about. So we have a nice break in the middle of the plan directly to the right of the mill buildings, and then picking up beyond to the right of that is a series of row houses that are in alignment, and I would use my pointer, but if you take the bottom edge of the mill buildings with the bottom edge of the row houses, those are in line, so it really enforces a street front continuity and activation along Main Street. The row houses with the little bump outs, they have a sense of stoop and individual arrivals that helps break down that scale of architecture. We're going to see that in the renderings. In terms of planning, we put this big, yep. Oh.
Yeah, Paul, it just happened with it's like a Zoom sign-in. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So moving.
Chairman, can I interrupt for 1 sec? Would it be helpful, to the extent that Bill is pointing out something important, if I just get up and point to it for the benefit of those in the audience or the zoning board, or would you prefer I don't do that?
It's it's fine with me.
What Bill's talking about with the townhouses
Right.
is that section right there.
There was an arrow, somebody had an arrow that was pointing.
Oh, was there? Yeah. Gotcha, great. Yeah, so there's a nice continuity picking up, so you have the mill buildings, a break. Now, this break in the facade is a strategic break, excuse me. It's a 110-foot step back from the face of the street back to the face of our building at that back of that parking. That's going to serve as the main entry of the building. So at 110 feet, the perception and the height of the building is going to be reduced. It also is a great benefit in terms of reducing or eliminating any opportunity for shadows to cast onto Main Street or any abutters at that distance. And what we're doing here is, we saw the parking scenario on the context slides. This is a great improvement. This has a one-way in and a one-way out, 2 defined curb cuts, angled parking. This is going to serve as a main central entry arrival point, right at our main entrance. It's going to provide drop-off parking, accessible parking, short-term parking for the community space, for tenants coming to look at leasing opportunities. It's going to provide Uber space and delivery space opportunities. So getting off of the street, away from the sidewalk, pulling in, landscaped around, creates a nice element. It also, by opening this up, you can see there's an outdoor amenity space that lets the southern light directly southern facing. That outdoor amenity will get flooded with natural light. As you come into that front little entry, that's the little bump out right below the amenity space. It's a little bump right here in the plan. That's the main entrance, main lobby. You walk into a roughly 6,000 square foot open amenity spaces. Imagine work from home spaces, a fireplace lounge, a game room, dog wash, a lot of opportunities for amenities. Once we get into the design development a little bit further, we're going to start to define that with Jeff's team there. And then another really nice architectural feature for siting is that amenity space gives off directly to 2 open air large amenity spaces. We're talking about 20,000 square feet right now. Again, we haven't defined all this programming yet, and once we will start to develop that. But in terms of having this outdoor amenity space, some of the opportunities could be a pool, a lounge for a fireplace lounge, a grill, an outdoor flexible lawn space, pickleball, a putting green, you name it. There's a lot of opportunities given the size and scale of this. So, and these are very private. The one off to the north is very private. There's no development right there with the river and the outcrop and all the trees. And then the main courtyard is sort of bound by 3 sides. So it has that really nice scale and sense of kind of enclosure, but being nice and bright. This This shot zooms into that public plaza. This public plaza is about 7,500 square feet. This dumps directly off of that northernmost mill. So this is a great opportunity and a public benefit. It serves, in my mind, a couple things. It does a couple things. One, it acts as a hinge point to the site. So it's the northernmost hinge point. We're really beautifying this corner. As you come down Myrtle Street, I think, and you make your way in, it sort of creates that knuckle, and you get this beautiful view right into this plaza, and you're fronted with the mills. So this is going to really activate that and gives a lot of opportunity for engagement and as a gateway. And some of the opportunities that we're seeing, you know, this could be a public lawn. It could have some food trucks that could pull into the parking zone for events, opportunities for string lights. You can have indoor, outdoor, open market style, kind of events going on, lawn games, fire pit, you name it. And there is an accessible winding path from the plaza up to the sidewalk, so it's a fully accessible space. In addition to being connected or across from the mill pond, there could be some opportunities for some amazing water views. We start at the first floor. This is the lower level. The reason I'm jumping down just to show you the planning of this site. So one nice feature about this is that most of the parking around this project, I would probably say about 85 to 90% of it, is hidden from public view as passerbyers go by on Main Street. We have the two-way circulation for fire truck all the way around the building, double loaded parking, 20-foot drive aisle around there. Most of it's in the back. That's all surface parking. But as you come around the back, there's an entrance to the building directly on the top. That gets you into the parking at the lower level. This parking lot is all concealed under the building, which would be all below that the open amenity, that green space amenity area. This is 211 parking spaces and all the services that we need to run the building. So we head up to the second floor. The second, the third, fourth, and the fifth floors, partial fifth floor, are very similar as the building kind of snakes around in its massing. So here's the second floor. You can see the bottom left part. You see the roof of the northernmost mill, and then a piece of the adjacent mill. We're fitting that out internally as a second story with currently right now we're looking at some bedrooms. But pretty efficient floor plan, double loaded corridor. As we develop get into the design phases, we're really going to look at the unit designs and work with SLV on that piece. So we're going to study and leverage, open concept, open living, dining, kitchen concept. Some of these units are going to have some balconies, which we'll see on the renderings. We're going to study efficient wall systems and windows and building equipment and fixtures. That's all coming, but right now it's just trying to get the massing and the architecture in place. So this is the second floor plan. As we head to the third, you're going to see that the building now does steps back from the mill. So you're looking at the roof of the two mill buildings there. And the fourth, this is all 4-story plan, double loaded corridor around to the row houses on the front with the little stoops. And as we add, so that was the third floor, sorry. And then when we come back to the fourth, you'll notice now we're pulling back about 110 feet back from the mill buildings. That pullback creates relief for the mills to allow the light to come through, and also pays a nice path for a nice private roof, amenity roof deck for the tenants of the building. They're going to have expansive water views and sunset views up there, so nice opportunities there. And then once again, we head to the fifth floor. There's a partial fifth floor in this building right now. And then that fifth floor then peels back again over where the row houses are along the street. So now there's no fifth floor element that is closer than 110 feet from Main Street. So none of the shadows should be coming over from that level onto the street. Here's just a site section real quick that just studies some context in terms of height relationship. It's a little bit tricky to see with the orange lines. Sorry if it pops back up here. I don't know. I'm trying right here. Let me scroll up. Okay, here we go. That's the 5th. Let's see. Is it regenerating? Let me keep going down. There we go. Up. All right, I'll leave it right there. So this is a section through the site. So Main Street on the far left, that's the dentistry, essentially, the building there. So Main Street, and you cut down, you can see the underground parking and then the river. So the horizontal orange lines are really just trying to show that there's the residential neighborhood off to the far north is really, the peaks of those gables are around the height of the top of the 4th floor. So really our building only sits about 1 story above that is really what it's showing. And about 2 stories above the units along, directly across on Main Street. However, if we remember, we're about 110 feet back on that 5th story, so that perception of height should greatly be decreased. And here's just a quick diagram. That is the dentistry right there, cutting through Main Street, and then you can see that 110. Just rounding up, we have 2 renderings and exterior renderings. So this is one rendering we wanted to show because this is the one rendering from Pleasant Street. Really the only time you're in from a car where you're going to coming up head on the building. And so this is right at, coming up on that intersection. A couple things on that is the massing overall is complementary to 2 things really. The massing and the exterior design, the architecture. We're playing off of the mill building design. And we're also pulling architectural ideas and concepts and vernacular from the row house, New England row house concept. So those are 2 typographies common to the area, and 2 of which that are contextually appropriate for a site having a history of light industrial use, in our opinion. So playing off of the mill buildings, the main part of the building, the 4 and the 5-story building that snakes through the site that you can see in that wood-toned color, we're really working with large regularized windows and simplified monetary volumes that are reminiscent of that post-war warehouse, mill-style building. So you get that sense of unity and organization and that will help flood the units with a lot of daylight. And then you can see the townhouse or row house architectural on the right. Those are 4-story elements. There, we start to break down the scale by introducing a contemporary bay element, a front stoop element, and some mansard roof ideas, all playing off of and paying a little bit of homage to the nearby residential neighborhoods. We're proposing a light gray brick that starts to speak to the mill building, granite building, but it's a smaller scale, but durable to New England and relevant and contextual as well. Again, I think one thing I just really wanted to stress is that as you're driving by this building, I think from the distance that we're pushing the whole structure back, you're going to see the 4 stories along Main Street with the broken down architectural scale and rhythm. But that 5th story further back is going to be largely unnoticeable as a passerby goes by, especially in a car. That concludes the architectural portion of the presentation. Yes, I can. Oh, I'm sorry. And I have one more slide. Forgot about that. So this slide actually is looking back from the mill building. So on the far left, this is that public plaza space down over the fence there, and you can see the smokestack. That it could be a nice signage opportunity to revamp there. Nicely landscaped that Bowler is going to talk about, frontage and tree-lined streets. And then from the distance, you can see in the far distance, you can barely see the 4th floor roof deck above the mill buildings and someone up there. So from a pedestrian vantage point, you're only seeing a little bit of the 5th floor from that distance, and then you can see the depth perception of how far back that is as you peer over the mill buildings. And then the far distances are the row houses. maybe we'd start with Bowler.
Before we continue with Bowler on the presentation, I wanted to make 2 points that I think are important distinctions. One, the public plaza we're talking about is public space. Okay, that's unusual for 40B projects. So we are proposing to have an area on our site that is very much open to the public that will be maintained by we as the owner. So that area that's shown, which we'll talk about again, is going to be to the benefit of residents of the town of Ashland, or really anybody for that matter, but not just residents of the community. That specifically is in response to comments that we heard from the town throughout the discussions that I mentioned over the last 18 months. The other thing that I want to make very clear is that public plaza area dovetails to the commercial/restaurant that is proposed currently, which is a renovation of that building. We obviously don't have a tenant right now, but the expectation is some sort of brew pub or restaurant or what have you in that space. I want to make it clear that is not necessarily our business. We are in the business of multifamily residential development. However, we do know that business, and we are willing to do that in direct response to what the town requested, which is more of mixed-use development. There are some synergies relative to uses and the like, but that is very much a component of our 40B that we have introduced in response to requests that we've received both by the Board of Selectmen and others to have a mixed-use non-residential component. So that whole portion of this project is really a tip of the cap, if you will, to things that we heard from the town relative to public outdoor amenity space, relative to mixed use, non-residential use, and synergies therein. So I just wanted to make that important distinction. And then the other thing I wanted to mention before I sit down and we'll turn it over is a lot of people, and I'm sure some in the audience, are hung up or think about the number of units. It's important for the board and others to recognize that 75% of our units are studios and one-bedroom units. Okay, that's an unusual mix in a suburban community, but we feel very bullish on that mix based on some of our recent experience in Framingham and Winchester. So relative to intensity of use, number of people on the site and cars, that's highly unusual. So if somebody said, well, you're doing 250 units, if we did 150 three-bedroom units, that would be way more intense and impactful on the town of Ashland than the proposal that we have tonight, which is 75% studio and one-bedroom units. And statutorily, under 40B, we are required to do 10% three-bedroom units, so we have 25 three-bedroom units, some of which will be designated as affordable, and then a very small percentage, 15% two-bedrooms, and all the rest studios and one-bedrooms. So I know that we don't have a slide on that unit mix. It is in the large binder. It is on the town's website relative to the overall mix of the plan, but I wanted to make that note before we continue. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to the team.
Good evening. For the record, John Cusick, principal with Bowler Engineering. I'll be talking about the civil aspect of the site. Mine will be pretty quick. It's not nearly as exciting as the architecture. It's pretty cut and dry, but I'll try to hit some very basic points that I think are important for the board and audience to understand. So first off, is from a overall project standpoint. This is a redevelopment project, and by that I mean to construct this project, it is fully within developed areas. So if anything, we're pulling the development back and providing more green space than exists on site today. So this is a redevelopment, and we are creating green space as part of this, which was important to us, and it was very much a design consideration that we move forward with. Relative to access to the site, there are two full-service access driveways. The first is to the north on Myrtle Street. The second is on the right-hand side on Main Street. So we do have two-way access all the way around the site from left to right. From those access driveways, we have some surface spaces that are proposed. There's about 59 parking spaces that are located there. As was presented previously, what's very nice about that is the building screens all of that parking. So that parking is really behind and lower from a topography standpoint. Obviously, you're familiar with the site. Main Street's high. Everything dips down to the back of the site. So there's a substantial grade change plus the structure itself. So a lot of that parking is fully hidden, and there's also access to the garage parking, which you saw in a previous slide. There was a very small access in, exit out parking area of about 18 stalls. That's simply for visitor parking and any drop-off right in the front of the site. And again, as you heard, other than just the obvious benefit of those spaces, it does provide some nice context in the building and setbacks and forwards and bringing light into that amenity area, which is quite nice. The site is located within a floodplain. The Sudbury River is behind the property. Currently, there is an existing concrete wall, if you've walked back there. That actually really holds up the land behind the site and the river. As part of this project, the wall's quite old, and we really want to just make sure that reinforcing that. So we are providing some infrastructure improvements along that wall to make sure that stays intact. We're not changing the characteristics or the height of it, just the integrity. When you go into the site, particularly if you go behind it after a rainstorm, you'll notice there's puddles everywhere. The parking lot's dug up. We're obviously going to be reconstructing everything, providing smooth, adequate grades, proper drainage. We're making sure we're getting rid of those bird baths, as we call them, within the parking lot areas. We will be providing stormwater treatment on site, where really there's no treatment exists today. There will be some restrictions with what we can do and what we can't do based on some of the impacted soils beneath the property, but we'll obviously work within the regulations and what we're allowed to do to accommodate that. From a utility standpoint, all of the utilities exist within the frontage streets. We will be looping a water line all the way around the property, so we'll have full looped water system, essentially following both of the driveway locations. Off of that, we will have hydrants throughout the property. We'll work with the fire department to make sure we're placing those properly, by the FTC connections and whatnot. But we are certainly planning for the infrastructure for that, and we'll work with the town staff to accommodate that appropriately. We'll have new sewer connections, gas, electric as well, that are all shown on the plans. So with that, I said very, very high level from the civil side, and we'll work with your peer reviewer to work out a lot of the technical issues that typically get reviewed as part of this process. But with right now, I'd turn it over to Brendan to talk about the landscaping and some of the amenity areas on the site.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Carey, Senior Landscape Architect at Bowler. Again, just a quick high-level overview of the landscape. Thank you for the nice words on the pocket park, but we're really excited about the public plaza. It being a gateway as we drive down Myrtle Street. It cleans up the view and it becomes a gateway to the downtown. We all know, Corner Spot's a very successful destination. We have restaurants downtown that are existing and upcoming. And this just adds a new destination for downtown to activate it and get more people to socialize. The second major point that we're pretty excited about is removing the expansive asphalt along Main Street. Right now, Main Street, the broken sidewalk, and then the parking and narrow drive lanes that aren't very safe. So our thought is to kind of add planting beds to kind of ground the building, add lawn and street trees to create a rhythm and scale to the street, and provide seasonal interest and everything great with trees, and really just kind of make it a more comfortable scale and place to walk, along with a safer sidewalk along the whole Main Street edge and reducing the curb cuts. We are pretty excited about how Main Street will look and kind of keep the Main Street improvements going with this project.
Chris?
Good evening. For the record, my name is Chris Lucas with Lucas Environmental, professional wetland scientist and registered soil scientist. I'm just going to give you a 2-minute overview of the existing resource areas on the site. The green line to the east, top of the page, represents the border of the Sudbury River. And to the south side of the project, to the right of the plan, there's another green line which demarcates the border of the existing man-made canal. The dashed green line in the middle, well, towards, not in the middle of the site, but into the developed portion of the site is the limit of the 100-foot buffer zone, which is within the Conservation Commission jurisdiction. The orange line is the demarcation of the floodplain that Mr. Cusick discussed earlier, as the site is in the floodplain. So everything towards the east and away from the mill buildings is within the limit of the floodplain. The site is also located within portions of the riverfront area under the Rivers Act, which has a 200-foot jurisdictional limit. As you can see, those areas are shown in blue. They don't extend into the site. In this particular case, this is a historic mill complex. Under the Wetland Protection Act, historic mill complexes are not subject, they're exempt from the Rivers Act. So they wouldn't be subject to any of the performance standards for work in the riverfront, which is reviewed by the Conservation Commission. So those areas are exempt, and this has all been approved through a Mass DEP file number through an order of resource area delineation. So the Conservation Commission has approved the limit of all the resource areas on the site, the floodplain, the river, the riverfront area. That was issued in November of 2020. It was extended in November of 2026. The Permit Extension Act would also give it an additional 2 years.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you repeat again what the Concom has already approved?
The Conservation Commission has approved the limit of the jurisdiction of the Sudbury River, the canal limits to the south, the limit of the floodplain, and the limit of the riverfront area on the site. So they've gone through a process which is called an abbreviated Notice of Resource Area Delineation. It's a permit review by the Conservation Commission. They reviewed the limit of all the resource areas on the site. Those resource areas were confirmed by the Conservation Commission, and they're confirmed as shown on the plan before you. And that's valid through November of 2028. And the canal does not have a riverfront. Canals do not have a riverfront area under the Wetland Protection Act.
Peter, for the next presentation, we'll figure out how to use the scroll bar.
So which one am I using? Just the roll? Oh, Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Jeffrey Dirk. I'm the managing partner with Vanessa and Associates, and as you heard from the introduction, we're the transportation consultants on the project. So I'm going to walk through the transportation assessment that we prepared for the project, just as a high-level summary, as the rest of the presenters have done. Transportation is obviously one of the subject areas that you'll have peer review done on, and I would offer that, as I go through this, I also serve as the peer review consultant for a number of communities and performing the same role that your peer reviewer will undertake. I mention that because the way that we undertake our transportation assessments is exactly the way I would conduct my peer review. And so your consultant will verify all of the findings and the methodology that we use in the assessment. But I'm going to go through kind of our approach to the assessment. We work very closely with Peter and his staff to identify areas of concern for the town that want to be evaluated as a part of this impact assessment. So hopefully we've incorporated all of those items as we looked at it. Most importantly, to make sure that it serves as a planning document. So we're looking at not only the impacts of the project, but also planning for the future of the community. And when we talk about transportation infrastructure improvements, that they meet the needs of the community, both at present as well as in the future with this project in place and potential future development in the area. So the first thing in conducting the assessment is there is a series of standards that we have to follow. Those are set by the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation establishes kind of parameters for study area. Always a question is, what intersections and roadways do you need to look at to evaluate the impact of the project? So there's some general guidelines that are used for that. It's basically any intersection where a project will add about 100 or more vehicle trips during a peak hour. So one peak hour of the day, if the project adds more than 100 vehicle trips to the intersection, you want to study that location. The other parameter that's looked at is a 5% increase in traffic. So if the project would be expected to increase traffic by more than 5% at an intersection, generally that would have an impact, and you'd want to study what those impacts may mean and look at if mitigation is appropriate. So our study area looks at that as a basis, but that's really only a guideline. So your consultant will be looking at to make sure that we've characterized or looked at all of the intersections where the project might have an impact as a result of the additional traffic. It's a transportation assessment. So what we're looking at is all modes of transportation, not just vehicles, but we're looking at pedestrians and bicycles and safety of sidewalks, roadways, and intersections as well for all of those modes of transportation. So it's not just vehicle focused as well. So as we're collecting our traffic data, we're counting pedestrians, bicycles, as well as motor vehicles at each of the intersections. So it's a very, very holistic study. So as we've assessed the impact of the project and we've looked at conditions before and after the project's traffic has been added to the roadway network, bless you, what we found was the project didn't have a significant impact. And what I mean by a significant impact is what we're measuring is increases in motorist delays at intersections. So if you're at the traffic signal at Main at Pleasant Street, today you wait a certain amount of time to try to get through that traffic signal. I think more importantly, you notice backups. So how many cars are waiting in front of me before I get through that intersection? And we look at those backups or the queues at intersections before and after the project's traffic. So as we're measuring those two parameters before and after we've added the traffic from the project, what we showed in terms of impacts were that delays did not go up by, they went up by less than 10 seconds for any individual movement or at the intersection overall. And if you looked at backups at the intersections today versus future with or without the project, the amount of vehicles that are stacked up at any of the intersections didn't go up by any more than one vehicle. So it wasn't very impactful in terms of increases in delays in vehicle queuing at intersections. That doesn't mean the traffic's free flowing, because it's not. And we've identified specific areas where there are delays, and we've also identified ways that the project might be able to reduce those delays. So I think what we're going to show at the end of the day with the mitigation, what we propose, is that traffic flow will not get worse. In fact, we're expecting that it will get better than what is out there today through some optimization of the traffic signal timing and coordination along the Main Street corridor. We know that the improvements have just taken place, but there's some opportunities, especially as we're looking at the future, because we don't have a project here today. We have a site that generates some traffic, but in the future it's going to generate more traffic, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and traffic patterns will change. So there is a need to make some adjustments to the traffic signal timing and phasing to account not only for the additional traffic, but just changes in traffic patterns in general. And so that's something that we will be, or we've offered to undertake as a part of the project itself. And as I said, with those improvements, what we're showing is that things will actually be better than they would be absent those improvements taking place, and it will certainly offset the impact of the project. So we've had a lot of discussion about the access points into the property. I don't want to lose sight of what has been talked about in terms of safety benefits. Today, you've got some uncontrolled driveways, so very wide open curb cuts. We've talked about the internal parking, the fact that there is not really a separation between the sidewalk or vehicle separation between the sidewalk and parking. All of that will change as a result of the project. So just by virtue of doing that from a safety perspective, it's a significant improvement in terms of the site itself and the safety with it specifically, or most importantly, for pedestrians that are in the area there. So I think that's a significant improvement that we pointed out very early in the transportation study without doing any assessment of impacts to the roadway network. I would also mention that the work that the town and the state have done in the downtown improvement project, this essentially extends those improvements northerly along Main Street to incorporate the project site, which we think is a good thing because that project sorted out and had some betterments in terms of sorting out what is the use of the roadway or traveled way, marked parking spaces, differentiation of locations or the sidewalk from the traveled way, things like that. So that actually, this project extends that in a northerly direction, so that's a benefit itself. Motor vehicle crash history. So as I mentioned, we look at safety. Safety is a very important part of any assessment that we undertake, and there's two things that we look at for safety. It's crash history at intersections as well as sight lines at the driveways. So as we looked at the motor vehicle crash history at the intersections, none of the intersections are what is known as high crash locations. So we look at crash rates at intersections. So we look at the number of crashes that are happening in relation to the volume of traffic going through the intersections. And Mass DOT publishes information for us so that we can look at the crash rates and compare it to state averages to see if the number of crashes in relation to the volume of traffic is disproportionate to what would be expected based on the amount of traffic that's going through the intersections. All of the intersections, the crash rate was below the state averages, which is a good thing. The other thing is that there's no high crash designated locations. The state also not only looks at crash rates, but they also look at severity of crashes. So if we have fatalities or a large number of injury-related crashes, they also look at that and they publish lists of high crash locations based on the type of crashes and severity of crashes. There's no high crash locations in this area. So we're starting from a standpoint of a location that doesn't have a crash history that would indicate that we need to deal with safety issues at intersections or along the roadways before we add traffic from the project. So that's really a good baseline for us to start from. Lastly, as it relates to safety, is the sight lines at the driveways. So we've done verification that the sight distances, so if you're exiting the driveways looking to the left or right, there's a certain distance that you need to be able to see a vehicle that's coming at you to be able to decide if it's safe to pull out. But more importantly, if you actually do pull out and for some reason your car just stops right in the middle of the road, can that vehicle that's traveling along Main Street see you, apply the brakes and stop and not hit your vehicle? So we're looking at those two parameters. And what we've identified is that the driveways all meet the minimum criteria. In fact, they exceed the minimum criteria for safety based on what you would need to be able to see to safely stop as you're approaching any of the driveways. We have some recommendations. We'll talk about that in a minute. So just jumping into the traffic study. Bear with me as I scroll through. So this slide just shows the context of the project site in yellow here. As we're looking at it from the context of the transportation infrastructure. I know the architect is looking at it from a different context. We're looking at how the project site interfaces with the roadway network. So as we're looking at this, you can kind of see the orientation in yellow here, the Sudbury River and Mill Pond distinct features that bound the site to the north. Main Street bounds the site to the west. So that just gives the general context in terms of the study area that we evaluated. So this slide shows what we looked at from the standpoint of intersections in the specific roadway network. So essentially we're looking at Main Street and Myrtle Street as they travel in from the southeast traveling up to the northwest and then to the northeast again as we're traveling on the roadway. And we're looking at all of the major intersections along there. So basically stretching from Raymond Street to the north of the project site, all of the intersections all the way down to the Summer Street intersection. So if you look at all of those major intersections between that point, there's 8 intersections plus the driveways into the project site. So that's essentially the study area that we've evaluated. That is the location that meets those criteria that I told you. So as we're looking at how much traffic the project's generated, no more than 100 vehicles during any peak hour going through an intersection, no more of an increase in traffic than 5%, so 5% or less. When you look at and apply those parameters, we've encompassed that in the study area that is shown on the slide here. The other important thing to point out as we're looking at this is the orange dash lines. We've shown those because that's the location of sidewalks. So what you've seen is this is a highly walkable site. And you've heard the other presenters talk about the fact that we're embracing the existing infrastructure in the area. So looking at the environment, but also looking at these transportation modes, this is a walkable site. So as we're designing the site, we want to make sure that we have connectivity, that you're able to get from the building safely out to the sidewalk, walk along the intersections. The signalized intersections all have crosswalks with push buttons so that you're able to cross the street from one side to the other. So we're hoping that what that does is it reduces the amount of automobile trips associated with the project, so that if you want to visit one of the retailers along the corridor here or come to Town Hall, you have the ability to you don't have to get in your car, that you're going to leave your car where you are and you'll be able to walk safely from the project site to these locations. So this slide kind of shows that context as it relates to the sidewalk infrastructure in the area. One of the other things that we look at before we move on from this slide is, as we talked about collecting traffic volume data along these roadways, just to give you some numbers to look at in terms of the existing volume of traffic. So as we're looking at the section of Myrtle Street just to the northeast of the project site, that section of roadway over a daily basis accommodates about 7,000 vehicles per day. So that's two-way traffic moving in both directions over a 24-hour basis. The section of Main Street, as you look at it to the south of Pleasant Street, the number jumps to about 12,000. So what you see in looking at those two numbers and what we're looking at as we evaluated is that Pleasant Street's adding a lot of traffic to the corridor. So as we're looking at two distinct sections of roadway, where the Myrtle Street section is a lower volume roadway versus the southern section south of Pleasant Street, which is a higher volume section of roadway. And that provides some context to us as we're looking at the driveways and how the driveway is going to operate. And that purposely looks at why the driveways are located where they are, why the full access driveways are located where they are. So that we put it basically on either side of the Pleasant Street intersection to disperse the traffic much better. And then the driveways that are the closest to Pleasant Street, which is where that signal is, they're purposely one way. They're purposely one way because the circulation works, but from a traffic perspective, we know that the proximity to the traffic signal, it's going to have queues of cars that are going to back up past those driveways that we had talked about. So the first driveway that's closest to Pleasant Street is a one-way entrance to the project site, because we don't want anyone trying to exit and make a left-hand turn. So it forces that traffic one way counterclockwise, so that as vehicles are exiting from that driveway, they're coming into the back of the queue and not in the middle of the queue. So those traffic numbers and the relationship between the higher volume section of roadway and the lower volume purposely has us establish the driveways to the design that you had seen. So that's why we look at those numbers. The other thing is the speed of traffic. Some distinct features, because the Pleasant Street intersection, we basically have three signals: Pleasant Street, Front Street, and then down at Summer Street. Those signals not only control the flow of traffic, but they also, for one reason or another, they also control the speed of traffic. So it's actually the Main Street section south of Pleasant Street is a lower speed roadway than the northern section along Myrtle Street. The speeds, they're not high speeds, but the speeds that we've measured south of Pleasant Street are closer to about 25 to 30 miles an hour. As you head a little bit to the north, we're 30 miles an hour and a little bit above that. So the distinction is really the fact that we have higher volumes, but also the signals are controlling some of the speed of traffic along this section of Main Street, south of Pleasant Street, a little bit higher speeds to the north of Pleasant Street. And again, the design of the driveways, as we looked at the sight lines, we've taken that all into consideration. So the next slide shows the traffic volumes from the project. So I'm not going to spend too much time looking at the totality of the project. I've highlighted kind of the areas where are probably more important. So this is the total volume of traffic to the right side in the yellow that the project's going to generate. And there's two columns that are highlighted there. The column to the far right, so at the extreme end of the table, that's the amount of new traffic that the project will generate, or that we're expecting to generate. So if you look at the top number, which is the number that is 1,602, that's the daily number. So that's the 24-hour number from the project site. So as we talked about, 7,000 vehicles to the north of the site, 12,000 vehicles to the south of the site, this is the number that would get added to those numbers. Some of it's traveling north, some of it's traveling south, so not all of it's going to get added to the 7,000 or the 12,000. But just to put in context the relationship of those volumes that exist on the roadway today to the amount of new traffic that we're going to add. That's the number that will get added to those larger numbers that I had mentioned in terms of the roadway. The next two numbers, the 148 and the 133, those are the peak hour numbers. So the first number, the 148, that's the amount of new traffic during the morning peak hour. So the morning peak hour on the roadway occurs between 7:15 and 8:15. So 7:15 to 8:15 in the morning, that's when the volumes on Main Street are at their highest level. And this is the amount of traffic we would add on top of the volumes on Main Street during that 1 hour period. The 133 is the new traffic in the evening peak hour. So the evening peak hour is about 4:45 to 5:45. That's again when, if you look at the volume of traffic on Main Street, that's when it's at its highest level. And this is when we would add that 133 vehicles to the roadway network itself. We assess the impacts of the project based on the peak of the project's traffic added to the peak of the roadway traffic. So it's basically peak on top of peak. And we look at what the impacts of the project will be. So as I'm talking about those changes in delays and queuing as a result of the project, we're looking at peak on top of peak because that's your worst case analysis condition. The other thing is we're looking at impacts is we're looking 7 years in the future. So although we talk about and we experience what's out there today, when we're assessing impacts of the project, it's not just today's traffic, it's traffic that might occur 7 years in the future. And that's where we've worked with Peter to identify what projects that town boards have approved that are not yet built, that may get built within that 7-year time period, and how much traffic would they add. Then we add the project's traffic on top of that. The other component is just general growth. If the town never approved another project within the community, traffic volumes are generally going to increase anyways. And just an easy example to that is if you have someone in your household that may be 14 or 15 now, 7 years in the future, they're going to be of driving age, and more than likely they're going to have a car, or they're going to borrow your car, and they're going to add to the traffic stream just as a result of increased automobile usage in a household that isn't there today. So that's going to generally increase traffic even if nothing else happens in the area. So there's a component of that future condition that's just general background growth as well, which is about 1% per year, which gets added. So that's compounded annually. So it's 1% per year grown 7 years out into the future. And again, we work with Peter and his department to identify specific development projects. So that's what we're looking at in terms of, as I mentioned, conditions with or without the project. It's 7 years in the future with and without the project as we're looking at impacts. So what you've seen in terms of the photographs of the project site is there are existing uses on the site that are generating traffic today. So this slide provides a comparison between the amount of traffic the project would generate versus the existing uses, and what you see is the difference in the far right-hand column. That's the net increase in traffic that the project represents after you've removed all of the uses and then added the new uses to the site. So it's not all new traffic. So what you see on the far right-hand side, the uses that are on the site today don't have a lot of morning activity, whereas the residential use will. So you see that we're expected to increase traffic going in and out of the driveways at the site by about 124 vehicles over what's out there today during that morning peak hour, 7:15 to 8:15 in the morning. In the evening, the uses on the site are a little bit more active, so we're adding about 89 vehicle trips to the project site. So less impactful in terms of net increase in traffic during the evening peak hour. So one of the things as we look at these increases in traffic is one of the reasons why it's not significantly impactful is because as we look at the study area, when the traffic gets out to the driveways, that's where it's most impactful because all of the traffic is entering or exiting the site at the specific access points to the property. As you get away from the property, the numbers get smaller because traffic turns left, it turns right, it's going to Framingham, Boston, wherever it may be going. And so as the traffic gets away from the site, it gets smaller and smaller in terms of the increases in traffic. And that's why as we look at intersections, there's not really concentration beyond the driveways of the project site. So the numbers get smaller, and that's why, as we're talking about those impacts of no more of an increase in vehicle queuing of one vehicle, it's because the traffic disperses itself. So this slide shows the dispersal of traffic for the residential component of the project itself. And the way that this is developed is we look at U.S. Census data for residents of the town of Ashland. You report that you live in the town, but you also report where you work. And so when we have that information, we can specifically look at from this point within the town, and based on where residents of the town work, we expect residents of this project will generally follow that same type of commuting pattern in terms of destinations of trips. And so we can look at from this project site, how do you get to those areas? How do you get from this site to Boston, to Framingham, to Waltham, or all of the major commuting or employment centers in the area? And we arrive at what's shown on the slide here. So about 50% of the trips we're expecting will be oriented to and from the north. 15% is on Pleasant Street. As we head to the south of the project site, there's 13% that we have on Front Street, 20% continuing along Main Street, and then 2% on Summer Street. So you can see dispersal of traffic. So that's why those numbers get smaller and smaller as we get away from the project site. We've done the same thing for the commercial traffic. The commercial traffic is different in terms of its trip pattern than the residential use, because what we're drawing from is really, we talked about having specific types of uses, so retail and restaurant space on the site. So that's going to be more of a local draw. So the way that distribution is derived that you see on the slide here is basically looking at existing patterns, because we're going to draw from the community. Small size retailers, you heard about 15,000 square feet of space thereabouts on the project site for commercial space. So we're not having a large generator of commercial related traffic where we're going to draw from outside of the community. So what you're seeing here is really a localized traffic pattern. So if you looked at the existing traffic pattern in the area, this is generally what it looks like. It's very dispersed between the intersections. You don't see a lot of concentration other than the fact that a lot of the trips are coming from either Pleasant Street or from the south on Main Street coming into the project site. But other than that, it's fairly dispersed between the roadways. So once we've estimated the volume of traffic, we've used this trip pattern to assign the trips out to the roadway network. We've assessed the impacts of the project. Based on those impacts, we have a series of recommendations that we'll go through here in the next few slides. And the first set of recommendations are with respect to the site access. Now, the site engineer, as you've heard, in developing the site plan, they've taken these all into account, so you'll see them as recommendations in the transportation assessment, but the project team has already taken these and has used it to develop the site plans for the project. So they're consistent with what you see on the slide here. So the drive aisles within the project site are of appropriate width for two-way traffic. Any place where we have one-way travel, the drive aisles are a minimum of 20 feet in width. That's required per the fire code, but that's sufficient for one-way circulation. The one-way area at the front of the building where we have entering traffic and exiting traffic in the counterclockwise direction, signs of pavement markings to regulate that. Stop signs for vehicles that are exiting the project site. ADA compliance on sidewalks within the site. And then the last two recommendations deal with the site triangle areas. So we want to make sure that as we're looking at and developing the driveways, and in particular the pocket park, which is a significant amenity related to the project. I know you're very familiar with the site, but today if you go out there, there's a fence on top of a retaining wall and the park is set down. If you're coming out of that driveway and if you look to the left, if you're thinking as Myrtle Street comes around and bends to Main Street, if you look to the right, it's great because you're looking up the hill there. It's relatively straight. If you look to the left, the curve is going in the wrong direction for you. The fence that's there on top of the wall is a sightline impediment. So what we've provided to the team is in that area there, we've developed the site triangle. The site triangle on the plan basically shows what a motorist looking to the left looks toward a car, and I mentioned that distance that you need to be able to see. So if I connect the dots from the motorist that's exiting to Main Street where you have to be able to see, and then I draw the line back around to where the project site is, it creates a triangle. Within that triangle area, you can't have anything that would exceed 2.5 feet in height measured from the surface of the driveway. That 2.5 feet in height gives enough room so that if we had a foot of snow out there, you would still be able to see over the top of the snow to be able to see that approaching motor vehicle. So one of the things we've done is develop that as a part of the site plan submission so that we make sure that there's nothing placed in that area that would exceed that 2.5 feet in height and everything else is set back. So it doesn't mean that you can't have anything within the site triangle, but it needs to be low enough so that you can have some snow piled on top of it and still be able to see out of that. So that's a part of the site plan, and the site's going to be designed so that we make sure that we've got those proper sight lines. The last thing is about snow windrows. We haven't had a lot of snow in the past few years. Maybe that's going to change this year, but we want to make sure there's no snow piles in the areas of those site triangles. So that's why it's important that the site triangles are a part of the site plan package that you'll be looking at to make sure that we don't have any snow piles in those areas. In terms of the off-site recommendations, One of the locations where we did show that there was some congestion occurring was at the Summer Street intersection with Main Street. Even with the improvements that have been taking place, if you're on Summer Street during the morning peak hour in particular, and you're trying to get out onto Main Street, turn left or right, we did show that that's a movement that's operating over capacity, and there certainly will be in the future if nothing else is done. There is an opportunity at that location to retime the traffic signal so that it operates more efficiently. As you look at the way that signal operates at that intersection, all of the other movements are well below capacity, which means there's some ability in terms of balancing out delays at that intersection to increase delays slightly for some of the approaches, but reduce the delay on the Summer Street approach. And as we're increasing delays in some of the approaches, we're not doing it to the extent where it would back up over the commuter rail tracks or extend significantly in any one direction where we'd start to block driveways. But what that rebalancing of the signal system would do is reduce the delays in Summer Street so we don't have the long queues that happen there. As we would undertake that, the 3 signals along Main Street to the north are coordinated with that traffic signal. So if you touch one signal, you've got to adjust the timing at the other signals to make sure that we don't create something where you come from one intersection and you encounter a red light at the next intersection. So rebalancing the system means rebalancing the traffic signal timing at all 3 intersections. But what we've shown is with that rebalancing, the intersections in total will operate much better than they do today. So it's an opportunity we've suggested that can be undertaken as a result of the project. The timing of that rebalancing we've suggested should be done coincidental or occur coincident with the project being occupied. Because as I mentioned, we want to get the traffic on the roadway. We want to see what those impacts may be and then adjust the timing to reflect those changes in traffic pattern and the change in volume. And then you probably want to do it once, maybe at 60% occupancy, and then do it again at about 80% occupancy. Between 80% and 100%, that actually could happen within a few days in terms of occupancy of the project. So we suggest that you look at basically 2 touch points, essentially, in terms of the retiming of the signal. That would have a significant benefit in terms of just improving operations in general along the corridor. And the last set of recommendations we have are what's known as transportation demand management measures. So these are measures to be undertaken as a part of the project to really encourage the residents of the project to use alternative modes of transportation. If you can walk, bike, or use public transportation, we want to make sure residents are aware of what's available. There is commuter rail service in the town. Unfortunately, it's to the west of the site and probably, it's a healthy walk, let's say, to get from the site to the commuter rail station. The Metro West Regional Transit Authority has bus service down at the Summer Street intersection, again, walkable, but not directly at the project site. But we do want to make sure residents are aware of the fact that these are available in the area. The town also has senior transportation. So again, make residents aware that they are able to contact the town to arrange for medical transport or senior transport as well. So these are all measures really informing the residents of what's available. And then in looking at the design of the project, making sure that we have bicycle parking both within the garage as well as exterior bicycle racks as well. So just things to try to reduce any amount of traffic that we can through specific demand management measures. And I believe that is my last slide, Jeff, so I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the board. We appreciate you indulging us. That concludes our presentation for the evening. One thing I was remiss in not mentioning, I think, probably everyone knows this, but I'll say it anyway. As this is a 40B project, 63 of the 250 proposed units would be designated as affordable for households earning up to 80% of area median income. And while only 63 of the 250 would be designated as affordable, the town would get to count all 250 units on its subsidized housing inventory, which obviously would be significant. And I know something the town is keenly aware of and interested in. So I was remiss in not mentioning that before, perhaps a statement of the obvious. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, we'll turn it over to the board for any questions. And should you look at me, we'll pop up and answer them, or if they're just questions for the record or whatnot. So,
sure. Thank you. And I again was remiss about not saying something at the beginning, and that was thanking you for cooperating and extending the time in which we had to open the hearing so that we could avoid having a hearing a couple of days before Christmas. I think that worked to everybody's advantage, but it's not something that you had to do, so we appreciate the cooperation with that. As I indicated at the beginning, this is the first of a number of meetings. Future meetings, I think, will probably focus more on a different component of the proposal and not the general oversight like we've had tonight. So I would open it up for questions from my fellow board members for a limited period of time. And again, just something general. We're going to have plenty of time to ask more specific questions at future meetings when we've had the ability for peer review to weigh in on the projects as well. But that being said, Brian, do you have any questions at this point?
I know it's really early, but how many seats would you anticipate the restaurant having? And would the parking be next to the restaurant?
The seats, I couldn't say. What we could do is use an industry metric relative to the amount of square footage we're proposing for the restaurant. So in other words, if it's an 8,000 square foot restaurant, that typically would yield 150 seats or what have you. The parking, there'll be dedicated parking, but it will be synergistic to the residential component. So we have a lot of parking data and information based on our other projects. So the parking is never, not all people are at their units at the same time. So we're quite comfortable that we'll be able to accommodate whatever the parking demand is, because there's lots of empty spaces. And it's also important to recognize one of the things that we've learned, and we do at all our projects, is there's no assigned parking. If you have a parking spot, you'll have a sticker or a placard that entitles you to parking, but there's no designated, you're not in space 186. And what that does is, because if you're in Florida for 2 months, space 186 would just stay open without the benefit of other people being able to use it. But without assigned spaces, it's basically people that have the right to park there will self-select the spaces, but all of the other spaces, whether people are at work or on vacation or what have you, will remain available. So we have found that a very effective way to manage our parking at other projects.
Thank you.
But we will endeavor to give you at least an order of magnitude of how many seats we might expect.
Anything else? Okay. Stu, any questions at this point? Stu, I think you're muted.
Yeah, Stu, we have asked you to unmute.
Is that better?
Loud and clear.
All right, two concerns I have. I was somewhat disappointed in the traffic study that didn't take into consideration the new apartments on Chestnut Street, because they're leasing now, and that's going to be traffic that's going to upset the numbers that have been already generated by this traffic study. So that's number one. And then number two, on the environmental presentation, I didn't hear anything about the EPA Nyanza plume issue that we're facing.
Stu, I think those are both good points. The environmental issue is something that's going to be focused on at one of our earlier meetings, and that will be fully explored. The Nyanza plume, I believe, is under the jurisdiction of the EPA and the Massachusetts state, and not within the purview of the ZBA to decide or make decisions on as part of this comprehensive review, but it's certainly something that we want to see addressed and get information on how it's going to be addressed so we can consider how, if the project is approved, it might be made as part of a condition. But you're right, there was no mention of that whatsoever. And the soundness spoke very loudly to me.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Campbell is here tonight. We didn't present on that only because, as you correctly characterized, it is a permit that we need to secure from DEP in the state. So if theoretically, we could get approved here and not be approved by DEP, and we would be, in big trouble. With that said, just for the courtesy of the board and the update, Mr. Campbell would be happy to give an update to the board on where we are in that process, or we can punt on it to a future hearing. A quick one.
If we could limit it to about 5 minutes, I think it would be helpful just to get a brief update on that, because it is something that many town residents are quite concerned about.
Just to give you an update, we've been working with, I'm George Campbell, Campbell Environmental, and we've been working with Mass DEP on this project for a while. And there's some concerns with the potential for vapor intrusion from volatile organics, and this development is planned to be environmentally friendly and protective. There'll be a vapor barrier installed, which will prevent vapor intrusion. In addition to that, the parking, as you noted, is on the ground floor, and that's also another measure to prevent vapor intrusion. So those are both very protective measures. Also, soil will be managed appropriately during construction, and we anticipate some contaminated soil will be properly disposed of off-site, and the soil will be managed appropriately. So, and we absolutely have been working with Mass DEP on this project.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, just a quick note. I just want to make a note and to confirm with the board and the public and the residents that since this application has been taken in by the town, DEP and EPA have been alerted of the application. So they are well aware of the situation that's in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals and the process that is being undertaken right now.
Thank you, Peter. Brian, any questions?
Yes, just briefly, and it is parking related as well. With respect to the public space that you described earlier, is it anticipated that there will be parking for the events at that space, at the property as well, or do you anticipate that'll have to rely on available street parking or things over near the corner spot and things like that?
There will be some dedicated parking for the public amenity, I guess is how we're referring to it, or pocket park. The quantity of those spaces and how that will be managed, I don't think we've quite worked out yet. We're hoping, quite honestly, that a lot of the people that go to that may walk or bike, but those that don't, there will be parking available, for people that choose to use that. It'll be, in combination with the commercial/restaurant space that we have in that area as well. We think those are synergistic. In fact, for the restaurant, and certainly not days like today, but warm weather months, we could have some outdoor dining as well. So it dovetails nicely to that area. But for future plans, what we'll try to do is endeavor to, I think, spell out a little bit more clearly, guest parking, parking dedicated to, restaurant/public amenity, residential parking. We can do like a color-coded map, if you will, that shows how that will be managed.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Anything else, Ryan?
Nothing else at this time. Thank you.
I had just a couple of questions, and one had to do with your filings before the Conservation Commission here in Ashland. Obviously, they still have jurisdiction over the state regulations, and do you know when you're going to file the notice of intent with Concom?
Mr. Chairman, it's our preference and typical that we're probably not going to file the notice of intent with Concom until we're through this process with this board. The reason we do it that way is we want to make sure that, our site plan and other things that are relevant and germane to that filing don't change, because we don't want to file a notice of intent and then have things occur here that requires us to restart with the Conservation Commission. Moreover, as this board is aware, we've asked for a few waivers from some of the local conservation regulations that this board will have to opine on as part of the process. So it's our preference, and will be effectuated here, that we don't plan on filing with conservation until we're probably done completely here, although I could anticipate a scenario where we file maybe before we have the final permit, but we're comfortable that the plans aren't changing. But the filing with conservation will not be imminent in the next several months.
Okay. And I guess with respect to that, there's been some indication that there may need to be some data collected for compensatory storage. And do you know when that might be available, even if it's going to be long before you file for your NOI?
Yeah, I suspect that would be, there's no data that needs to be collected, that the grading was done to provide the compensatory storage that we believe we need for the flood plan. I suspect that's something that would be reviewed by your peer reviewer, and he might ask for some additional information as part of that. But that would be looked at, I think, as part of this process. Your peer reviewer will look at some of those items.
Okay, and that's all in this big packet material that was filed with the town?
There was a drainage report that was in the big packet.
Thank you. And my last question has to do with the lower level parking plan that was filed in your 3-ring binder submission, and I'm trying to understand it. It's for lower level parking, and there are a number of spaces that have dark automobiles parked in them, and a lot of spaces that don't. So I'm not quite sure what the significance of the dark automobile is. You're looking at me like you don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I'm looking above you, Mr. Chairman. Bear with me. By the time we scroll back to that slide, it'll be about 10:30.
Well, I almost interrupted the presentation when he was on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's probably just a graphical representation.
Just to notice what it is.
I mean, those are all, oh boy, I crashed the system. Oh, no. Peter and I will figure this out for the next hearing.
I think a PowerPoint's gonna work best if you send me.
Not PDF.
Or not PDF.
All right,
no,
we can do
PDF
that.
is no good.
All right, we're almost there. But basically, every spot in the lower level is a parking spot. There's no...
Okay, so, I mean, we don't need to see it if there's nothing specific about the
There may have been a
black
couple
car
cars
spaces.
included for, graphic representation of cars parking there. Is that what it is? Yes.
Okay. Fine. Mm-hmm. There you go. And the entrance is on the Sudbury Riverside?
Yeah, in the rear behind. So one of
And
the
there's
things
only
that
one
was...
entrance
Yes.
and exit?
One of the things, here it is. So one of the things that was not, we didn't say in detail, but I believe, and Bill and John, correct me, but from Main Street to the rear of where cars would enter is about 14 feet of grade, of 13 and a half feet of grade difference. And what that means is it's gradual, but it allows us to put this parking podium, which the lighter gray is all basically in the foundation of the building, which won't be seen by anybody. But that allows us to put it at grade without excavating the site. So the entrance is, if you come down the easterly driveway and there's some surface spaces and go around, you enter to the rear of the building, and that's a two-way in and out.
Parking, just to add, And the parking, on the eastern side of the site, the back side, there's a V, and it's like it's signifying a ramp when you come straight in. That part is the lower part of the parking. It's a 2-level parking. So it's low in the back rectangle, if you will, which would be that main rectangle. And then this is a ramp, and then all of this is raised up to get the critical systems up out of the systems that would help support the building. So because of that 13.5 feet, we have the ability to do that. So.
And are there plans for EV chargers anyplace?
Highlight when we do
So that's,
when we do the color-coded parking, we can also identify,
okay,
at least to the best of our knowledge now, where the EV stations would go.
that would be helpful.
Both inside and outside.
Thank you. If there are no other questions from the board, we can open it up for public comment or questions. Again, it's 20 minutes to 9. I'd like to limit that for about 30 minutes in total. People will have plenty of opportunity to ask questions, make comments as we go along. In addition to speaking tonight, I'd ask, please don't be too duplicative of what a previous speaker may have said. And you can always send written comments directed via email to Peter, our town planner. They will be entered in the record as well. Anyone that wishes to speak, please line up on against the wall there. And for those that are watching on Zoom, and if they wish to be heard, raise your hand button there, and we have a whole lineup of people there. And Peter will let people in and sort of alternate between in-person and online till we get to everybody. And again, I would ask you to limit your comments to just a couple of minutes if you could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with that said, I will take the first one in the room, and then I'll alternate to everybody online. Just to make a note from folks online, please raise your hand, and at the appropriate time, I will ask you to unmute. So with that said, I am going to go to Mr. Joe Mignani first. Mr. Joe Mignani, I have asked you to unmute. Please state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Peter. Joseph Mignani, 2 Harper Lane, Ashland, Mass. Appreciate the presentation. I understand this is an overall view presentation, and we didn't get into the nuts and bolts of the project itself. I was a little concerned with respect to the transportation presentation. A couple of things that I'm not sure have been put into that transportation study, and that had to do with the MB CSX and the train station that we have in town here. Also, with the number of trains that come through the town, that has an issue. I don't know if that was a factor that may change some of your figures with respect to the volume of the traffic flow and or the queuing of traffic that's waiting for the trains to come through town. There are a number of trains that do come through, especially in the morning during the rush hour and in the evening when people return home. So I don't know if those have been factored into those figures, and if not, I would assume that's going to change your perspective. And I would like to make sure that that is taken into consideration. And finally, also in your presentation, one of the maps, it showed that there were sidewalks on Water Street, and at this time there are no sidewalks on Water Street. And we're dealing with that, with the residents having issues with people coming down that area, not wanting to go through the intersection and waiting for the traffic that's happening all the time. So I was just a little concerned about the presentation. I appreciate the effort, but I think there's more work to be done with respect to that. And I'm really concerned about the fact that I know it's an overview, but hope it goes a little bit deeper than what we just saw tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mignani. I go to the next person in the room, Mr. Mark Dessoni. Mark Dessoni, please step forward and state your name and address.
Yep. Thank you. Mark Dessoni, 119 Main Street. On the traffic study itself, you have the flow of traffic, the queuing and all that. But when this is going to be finished and built and having all the 200 plus in the apartments, it's going to be at least one driver per car. And it's going to be a queuing problem in the parking lot to exit or even get on. So I'm going to be looking at that as a flow in the queuing. How you have the buildings themselves being inside 3, 4, 5 stories high. I was just wondering why not even consider after maybe the first floor of 40 of the apartments, second, third, fourth floors, to have mixed small office commercial on each of the other floors to attract more than just residents and people coming through. Because it's gonna be, hopefully this town is gonna be growing with the future people that they can work in this town and maybe work in those commercial office parks, office positions. Overall, because of a 40B situation, it does not help the economic of this town as a business looking down the road. And because we have the problem, well, not a problem, but the idea about the T-station housing project that the state's trying to push through, it's just going to just add more to what is already a small two-lane area streets. But the town does not look to have a direction. But if you try to put in more pedestrian-friendly signals for the queue and for the traffic and coming out, it could be understanding better for the reasons why people could live in this town. Last one, and hopefully if at this time, maybe a second round, which I kind of doubt. Time-wise, this meeting opened about 7:05, and it's close to quarter 9, 10 of 9. Let's have some consistency in opening up for everybody else before being put back on the back burner and being almost asleep by the time we're up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeSoni. Next, via Zoom, Leah Suarez, I am going to ask you to unmute. Please state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Leah Suarez. I live at 25 Valley Road. I also work downtown directly across the street from where this development's going in. And I regularly parallel park on Main Street directly across the street from this. I have some very strong concerns about pulling in and out of this complex, especially if you're making a left-hand turn into the complex or a left-hand turn out of the complex. There's no left-hand turning lanes in any of the places where you would pull in. And pulling out, you're very close to the intersection of Pleasant Street where there's a light. There's regularly loads of traffic and pedestrians crossing the road around there. I'm curious why none of the driveways line up with the light on Pleasant Street. I'm also curious where the school bus stop will be for this complex.
Thank you, Leah. Those comments were made, and I believe the applicant has put them into their notes, and hopefully they will be built into the traffic study. With that said, next up, please step up to the microphone.
Ashwanath Chandani, 10 Arbor Road. I'm also the chair of the Sustainability Committee in town. A couple of questions. I think we're hitting the traffic thing anyway, but you mentioned that you're anticipating 134 additional vehicles, if I got that right, during morning peak time. about 84 vehicles, you know, in the evening commute. You have a 250-unit complex. That math doesn't math for me somehow. So I'd like trying to understand sort of how that's factored in. I'm sure you've got some models that you work through. I think there's a mention also about, you know, school buses, as well as by Joe about, you know, when the train goes through, you know, those are at both those peak times as well, because it is a commuter rail and those times sort of matter. So I'd love to sort of see that addressed. As you all are building out the color-coded map, you know, one question you tried to answer was where the EV spots would be. I'd love for you to consider, you know, potentially having wiring in for all spots so that, you know, as we transition into a future, you know, it's much easier for you to put wiring in right now so you can expand EV spots. But in addition to that, I'm hoping that at some point during this process, we'll spend a little bit additional time on just sort of sustainable features and environmental features. Guessing that's coming up, so I'll reserve questions for that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Next via Zoom, I will ask on Amanda to please unmute and state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Amanda Walsh and I live on Pine Hill Road. I appreciate you working with the town. I just want to call that out for the developer. Thank you very much, and for, you know, taking the community's input into your plan. I have a couple of questions or comments. Would the builder be willing to consider changing the color of the orange / like sand cement to a different color? I think that the white and gray scheme you have right now is really nice. And if you change that orangey color to more of like a charcoal, it would be a nice contrast and complement the stone buildings better. The orange just looks off to me and it doesn't fit the current vibe of downtown. The next thing I have is what was brought up already regarding Myrtle Street and the entrances and exits. In previous plans, they had the entrances lining up with Pleasant Street, and I really think that would help with a lot of safety and traffic concerns. Is it possible to put maybe a ramp in where people can go down a ramp to that lower level? See if that's a possibility. The small parking lot that you have in your design, I think that's only going to back up traffic further, and people will double park, etc. I don't know if there's a way to improve that. Is there the possibility to add in a river walk? That was in a previous plan, and I think that'd be a really nice feature. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. Next to the podium, please introduce yourself, Ms.
Joan Confrati, One Shore Road. On the Historical Commission, speaking on my own behalf. I'm hoping you'll rethink the 40B project. I realize it's gone far down the road, but these iconic buildings were built in 1880. They're made of granite milled in ashland that will last forever. They'll be demolished, at least the third building and partially the second building, and replaced with 5 to 6 story buildings that may last 50 years. This project will, in my mind, will destroy the character of downtown Ashland. Many small buildings will be lost. I'm imploring you to take another look at the options and help us save our downtown. Henry Warren worked there. Excuse me. He revolutionized the world with the standardization of AC current that is still used today to regulate electricity all over the world. He is the inventor of the synchronous motor and the Warren Master Clock, which standardized time for the entire world. He deserves to be honored, and we should not be tearing down the buildings he worked in. Please, at a minimum, try to keep the third mill building. Please take another look at the project to see if there's a way to fix up and make the mill building's business owners successful, possibly adding some apartments in the back. I think there's a way to rethink this that would be helpful to the whole area. Towns that have saved and reinvented their mill buildings very successfully, allowing businesses in their downtowns to thrive. Hudson is a great example. Lastly, if this moves forward, please deed a reasonable amount of apartments for Ashland residents and workers. Set up a fund for water, sewer, schools, and public safety resources. Our resources are stretched to the max. I truly believe the tide is turning. People are moving out of Framingham because they hate high-rises and urban look. They want to own something, not throw away their money on overpriced apartments. And I realize that you have to make your money back, and that's probably why the apartments are priced the way they are, but affordable is not affordable. Lastly, parking. I don't think the parking is realistic. There are 7 homes on the end of my street, and there are 20 cars, and all of those homes, with the exception of ours, which have a few more buildings and only 2 people in it, are all moderately sized homes. with generally three bedrooms. So just some things to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Next online, Helen Nicole, I am going to ask you to unmute yourself. Please state your name and address.
Hi, excuse me, Helen Nicole, or Elliott Circle, Ashland, Massachusetts. So I have to say, I do agree with everything that Joan said. I'm also on the Historic Commission in Ashland, and I really do wish that you would consider finding a way to incorporate those three buildings into that development. That just really is part of Ashland's history, and it's so important. But my two questions that I actually came on to ask, one, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the gentleman's name that was speaking earlier. He said that the project itself is exempt from the Rivers Act because this is a historic mill building area, but these aren't going to be mill buildings. These are going to be residential apartment buildings, and that's apples and oranges. So I don't really understand how that's an equivalent. So I'd like to have that explained. The other thing I'm asking is actually for someone else. Some of the business owners that are in the mill buildings now would really like to know the timeline of this. I don't know why they don't. Maybe it's because there hasn't really been one, but I'm wondering if you can tell me what the timeline is so the business owners know what to expect. And those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. To answer your one question about timeline, I can state that from tonight, the town, and correct me if I'm wrong, Council, the town, without any additional extensions, which would need to be agreed upon by the applicant and the town has 180 days to hear this application. But other than that, it's very tough to predict a timeline. So other than that, that's the state statute. That's what I can state for the record, which is fact. And then, but that can change over time. So, but I think your first comment was heard by the applicant, and I hope they made note of that. Going to the next hand that has risen via Zoom, since nobody is present in the room at the podium, is Mr. Alex Keefe. Mr. Alex Keefe, please unmute yourself and state your name and address.
Oh, thank you. Alex Keefe, 107 Pine Hill Road. Thank you again for putting on this presentation. And looking at the maps that you posted, I identified that you neglected to include Pine Hill Road on it. It actually comes before Raymond Marchetti Street, and it's usually a big traffic issue that's occurred because if you go up Pine Hill, it attaches to Winter Street, which then shoots over to Corderville Road, brings you into Southborough. I know in the past we've had issues up there to the point where the town has installed a gate on one end of Winter Street. So I'd love to see if the developer could include in their updated traffic study to include what impact the turns are going to have on Pine Hill Road on that entrance and exit you were planning to have on Myrtle Street. And if we can look at seeing if that entrance and exit, which has caused accidents in the past when I worked for the police department, to see if that can be either a one-way left turn only or only an entrance into the facility. So I'd be interested to see that in an updated traffic pattern that could include that street with the town. And hopefully the feedback that we all gather here tonight can be presented at the next open forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keefe. There's one last Zoom hand raised, and that is Maureen. Maureen, I am asking you to unmute. Maureen, since Maureen has not responded, I'm going to move to a hand up that has.
Wait a second. Hello. Sorry.
Okay.
Maureen Flaherty, 14 Carolina Circle. There were a couple of things. The south entrance onto Main Street, I believe one of those gentlemen said that you only have a 3-car backup coming out at any given time. And I just believe that, it would be way more than that at rush hour traffic. And, oh, I left my notes in the other room. I just wondered about that. I just think this is gonna be a really tough thing on this town. I think it's gonna add a lot of people and a lot of traffic. Coming out of Pleasant Street, coming out of, Raymond Marquetti is tough now. So I just wonder about all that. Thank you. Thank you for coming and explaining all this to us too. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Maureen. Since the last look, we have one more person with their hand up on Zoom, and that is Jim N. Jim N., can you please unmute yourself and state your name and address?
Sure, I hope you can hear me. It's Jim Nugent, Pine Hill Road. And I, like most of the speakers tonight, mostly concerned with the traffic, and was wondering if the traffic study was done during the pandemic. But anyways, just feedback, the traffic is the major concern. My question was the entrance to this project only going to be from Main Street and the exit only going to be on to Myrtle? Is that what I was to understand?
The consultant is shaking his head. Would you like to correct, please?
Thank you. For the record, Jeffrey Dirk of Vanessa and Associates. So I'll answer the two questions that were asked. The traffic study was not done during the pandemic. It was actually done last year, so 2024. The access points to the property, there's two full access driveways. One of those driveways is on Main Street. The other one is on Myrtle Street. So you can drive around the building essentially and come out at enter or exit from either one of those access points and drive around the building. There's two one-way driveways on Main Street just to the north of Pleasant Street that serve the little circular pickup drop-off area as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I feel for the 124 people trying to leave at 7 o'clock in the morning from those locations, but good luck.
Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to be heard briefly tonight? Again, there'll be future hearings with future opportunities to comment or ask questions as we go forward and dig into the various issues that have been presented and raised tonight. If not, we will end the public questioning for this evening, and I will look to my fellow board members because we need to deal with the peer review issue. And on the agenda tonight, Town Council had prepared a motion for something that we needed to consider, and that was peer review consultants in the civil environmental area, traffic area, and water and sewer initially. So would somebody like to make the motion? So moved. Okay, and again, that would be civil. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, and again, the motion would be for civil and environmental to retain Hancock Associates as represented by Joe Pesnola, traffic as represented by MDM Transportation Consultants, represented by Bob Michaud, and water/sewer, Haley Ward, represented by Greg Eldridge. Motion's been made and seconded. I, John Trefethen, vote in favor.
I, Brian Forrestall, vote in favor.
I, Stuart Siegel, vote in favor.
I, Ryan Sullivan, vote in favor.
Thank you. We have that taken away, and again, they can start work as soon as we receive the check from our applicant, which I'm sure will be forthcoming quickly. Just so that everyone knows, once the application had been, plans had been filed with the town, the town reached out to various departments in town seeking their written comments on the plan. To date, we have received written comments from the Sustainability Committee dated December 6, 2024, a one-page report from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund dated January 6, 2025, and a Board of Health comments on 10-50 Main Street project that is undated. All three of those will go into the public record. And I would encourage the Planning Board, the Design Review Board, the Conservation Commission, our Building Commissioner, the Fire Department, Police Department, and Department of Public Works. We await your written concerns or comments on the plan as soon as possible so we can take those into consideration as we go forward. I think the next item that we need to talk about, and that would be with our applicant, would be the next meeting date. Typically, we meet on the second and fourth Tuesday of the month. However, as we start to dig into these issues, it would be helpful, I think, for us to have at least part of one of the peer review items before us so we can interact with your consultant, et cetera. And for that reason, it would make sense to me to skip the fourth Tuesday of January because we're not going to get a report by the peer review consultant by that time. The next scheduled meeting would normally be on Tuesday, February 11th. And I think that would be, from the board's perspective, a good time to move forward if you folks are available on that date, and specifically perhaps with the issue that we would want perhaps to address first. I think you saw from the, or heard from all the comments from the public that traffic is a primary concern with this project, and that perhaps going forward as we focus on one area per meeting, perhaps, the traffic would be a good one to start with. Your consultant is shaking his head yes. He's eager to come back and perhaps send a bill for his time, as he certainly should, that we could start with that, if that works for you folks.
Mr. Chairman, that works well for us. I plan on dropping off a check with Peter, if not tomorrow, what's tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, so they can get going right away. Starting with traffic works great for us. We'll be prepared to respond to the extent it's okay with the board. Should the peer reviewers have any direct questions, they can reach out to our team directly or through Peter, whatever pleases council and Peter relative to the process. And then I have a question, because I like to know what my homework is. We heard, a bunch of comments tonight, some of which are statements, and I don't know that they really need a response per se, but some questions. Is the expectation for the board for us to answer those? Should we wait to hear from peer review first? I don't want to be accused as being unresponsive, so I'm just asking the board how it would see, should I talk to Peter and say these are the questions I heard? Does this reconcile to what you'd like us to answer? I just want to make sure we're being responsive.
Let me consult with council for a moment. I think we're going to be dealing with peer review, so if you answer the questions that the peer reviewer raises, that hopefully will be sufficient, and if anything else arises, we can go from there. Obviously, you heard some questions about a road that may not have been considered with the traffic consultant, so that may or may not be worthy of your consideration. That's
Well, I'll
for you
say,
to decide.
yeah, I'll say this. I mean, we and our team have the benefit of those questions. So as part of the response to the peer review, even if perhaps a peer reviewer does not identify it, we'll try to weave in, you know, some responses
That
to
would be
some of those
helpful.
questions. But I think some of the questions we heard tonight will be raised by the peer review consultant. So from an efficiency standpoint, we'll wait to get the benefit of their letters and we'll respond. And as I said, I'll work with the team to make sure that the questions that we heard get woven into our response in one way or shape or form.
Yeah, but nothing else before we do that. Okay. Thank you. I would entertain a motion to continue the hearing until Tuesday, February 11th at 7 p.m.
So moved.
Here, again, we'll be doing a hybrid meeting in person here at the board, but also on Zoom.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
I, John Trefethan, vote in favor.
I, Brian Forrestall, vote in favor.
I, Stuart Siegel, vote in favor.
I, Ryan Sullivan, vote in favor.
Excellent, thank you. This hearing is continued until February 11th. We have some additional business that I'm sure most of you probably don't care to stay for. Why don't we take a brief recess for a couple of minutes to let the room clear out, and then we can continue with the rest of the business. Thank you. Welcome back to the January 7th, 2025 meeting of the Ashland Zoning Board of Appeals. Next item on the agenda is meeting minutes from our November 26th, 2024 meeting. That item is going to be tabled until our next meeting on February 11th. Fifth item and final item on the agenda is staff updates and administrative matters. The first order of business is we have someone who has expressed an interest in joining the ZBA as an associate member. His name is Daniel May. He filled out a talent bank form, which was submitted to the board. He's interested in a position as an associate member, and pursuant to the Select Board's policy, they would like a potential member to attend one or two meetings, meet the board, answer or ask any questions he might have, answer any questions we might have of him, and then take a vote to determine whether to recommend his appointment or not. All of that being said, introduce Daniel May. Daniel, welcome. Thank you for your interest in the ZBA as an associate member. Your talent bank form was forwarded to us by Susan Roby from the Select Board office. You obviously have an extensive background in commercial real estate, and having heard the meeting this evening, do you have any questions for us?
Daniel, you can come to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I led him to the wrong place.
No questions at this time, but I thought that project was very interesting and extensive, and kind of excited to see where it goes.
Okay, very good. Anybody have any questions for Daniel?
Hi, Daniel. What kind of work do you do?
I work at Keller & Sadowski as a commercial real estate broker. I focus in the retail sector. Prior to joining Keller & Sadowski about a year and a half ago, I worked at Cushman & Wakefield as Fidelity Investments master broker, negotiating retail transactions across the country for their investment center portfolio.
Nice. Thanks.
Brian, any questions?
Yes, just what sparks your interest, obviously, in ZBA and the work we do?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town, Duxbury, Massachusetts, on the coast. Went to school in Boston at Wentworth. So I've been in Boston for about 15 years, and then just moved out to Ashland in September. And so very lonely, trying to meet people and get familiarized with the community, serve the community, and just make good use of my time. And I feel like my background could be of good use to the people here of Ashland.
Excellent.
Welcome to town.
Stu, any questions?
No, not really.
Okay. I have no questions either. We are entitled to have 4 associate members on the board. At the present time, we only have 2. So we are certainly in dire need of having another associate member added, especially as we begin what promises to be a rather lengthy process with the comprehensive permit application that started earlier this evening. Let me do this. I don't think there's any need to have you attend a second meeting to see how we operate. Are you comfortable with becoming a member of our board and working with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing I need to learn is just the formality of answering and that kind of thing.
Me too.
Yeah, formality is not our strong suit. We come from after 5 years of nothing but Zoom meetings where we're getting back into the real world, and it's not always an easy transition.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll pick up on it.
Okay, that being said, why don't we take everybody comfortable with recommending Daniel to the select board to be
Yes.
an associate member?
Yes.
Stu?
I vote in the affirmative.
Okay, I do as well, so that'll be a 4-0 vote. I will write Ms. Roby an email tomorrow addressed to the select board indicating that we met this evening, we discussed the matter with you, your qualifications are outstanding, I think, for what we need in the ZBA. and recommending your appointment to the Select Board. Now, the process thereafter is, in the past at least, the Select Board would invite you to one of their meetings to be introduced. We have a Select Board member who's here in an unofficial capacity, nodding her head in agreement, and just so they can see you, meet you, answer any questions you might have, more importantly, ask any questions they might have of you. One that pops to mind might be any potential conflict of interest with one of your business projects coming before the ZBA. I know I was addressed with that question when I first came before the Select Board years ago. But I think, you would qualify, assuming they appoint you and the Select Board is the appointing authority. You have to get sworn in by the town clerk, and then you're an official associate member of the ZBA.
Excellent. Excited to join.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Welcome, welcome in advance. Okay, Peter, any other staff updates or administrative matters?
No, I think the only really staff update is to give is that former zoning board member Nathan Band, I believe everyone has received notification that Nathan is going to go on active military, and so therefore he will not be with us.
He's taken a leave of absence from his position, and
that's correct.
Hopes to be back in 2026, I believe.
I believe so.
Yeah.
So with that said, just to make a note, is that for at least a 40B case, obviously Ryan and or Stu, I know I talked to you a little bit about this with you, John. One of you will be asked to step up in a full voting capacity.
We don't have to make a decision on who the members hearing the decision are and the case is until we get to that point.
Yeah, I'll confirm with Lisa on that.
I believe that's what she said.
I think that's what she said, obviously, but I think attendance is critical, as this thing moves forward to make sure that we don't lose track of obviously the cases, the dates, and kind of voting capacity. So with that said,
The only other thing is Nathan was the ZBA representative on the comprehensive plan.
That is correct.
Committee, and I think would certainly be, they're well along in their process, but it would probably be beneficial for him to be replaced on the committee by a member of the ZBA. Is there anybody who would like to assume that position? I'm hearing crickets.
I think I need to get a little bit better idea of when they meet and how much of a commitment
I'll bring,
it is.
you know what, I'll be here on the 11th, just to make a note, obviously with this big case, I will be helping staff the zoning board. Alvaro, who usually is on the ZBA, may kind of switch and work to the planning board.
Someone who wishes to be
Yolanda.
heard.
Good evening, Yolanda Greaves, member of the Select Board, also a member of the Comprehensive Plan Committee. So it's currently about a 1 meeting a month commitment plus some homework for members of the Comprehensive Plan Committee. So our next meeting is, I believe, the third Thursday in January, so the 16th or something. And then work with getting the information out and possibly, talking to the community members, bringing stuff back to your board to get feedback on the comprehensive plan. We're pretty far through the process. The hope is that it will be completed by the fall town meeting. So if you're looking to consider whether or not you have the time, and if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can have a conversation with you.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
That being said, nothing else to discuss?
No, I'm all set.
Excellent. Someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
All in favor? Aye, John Trefethan, vote in favor.
Aye, Brian Forrest, I'll vote in favor.
Hi, Stuart Siegel, vote in favor.
I, Ryan Sullivan, vote in favor.
Excellent. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.